Good evening, welcome, bonjour, shalom, salam, from wherever in the world you're listening. This is North London Friends of Israel Group broadcasting to the world. Welcome to our inaugural question and answer session, which is everything you wanted to know about Israel, but were too afraid to ask. Everyone on the North London Friends of Israel committee volunteers their time unpaid, completely free of charge. And in between us, we've got decades of study and personal experience of Israel. We have Jewish, Christian, Muslim and Hindu members and supporters, and those of no religion. We do regular public stands and meetings across the North London and South Hertfordshire area, where we enlighten people about the true situation in Israel. I'm constantly flabbergasted by the overwhelming support of British people for the state of Israel, both in concept and in reality. And having done hundreds of public meetings, community fairs, and events, I can honestly say that around 99% of people are positive to Israel. And even those that are negative sometimes stick around for a chat. And by the time we finish with them, they often shake our hand, they go away with a much more understanding attitude. And one lady in my local area in Barnet even came back and brought us a box of chocolates, which was really nice. My name is Leon. So if anyone wants to join us, any one of you out there wants to join the group and go on the mailing list when the coronavirus lockdown ends, then you are most welcome. Harry's going to put the details on screen now. Thank you, Harry. We've had a question come in. Any views and answers given tonight are totally independent and they're personal opinions only, not those of North London Friends of Israel. So if anyone says, for example, Jeremy Corbyn is a closet racist anti-Semite, then that may be a very widely held view amongst genuine anti-racists, but it's a personal opinion only and it's not endorsed by the organisation. I'm going to go straight to written questions. Now, go ahead with the questions.
Okay. The first question is from David Hardoon, and he says, to annex or not to annex?
Right.
That's the question.
Very Shakespearean. A fine intellectual start to the evening. So that's a very good question. Let's take you back. Let's take us back to 1917 and the Balfour Declaration, with which I assume many of you are familiar, but if you're not, then it was it's a British government announcement recognizing that recognizing the right of Jews to return to their ancient homeland. A few years later, in 1922, there was something which you might consider even more important, which was the San Remo summit, whereby the Balfour Declaration was voted into international law. So the right of the Jews to return to their homeland was enshrined in international law. Now, at that time, it was deemed that Palestine would be the home of the Jewish people. Now, Palestine, and this is something that not a lot of people know, at that time, Palestine comprised current-day Israel, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, parts of southern Lebanon, Gaza, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the entire present-day state of Jordan. Now, a few years after the San Remo Agreement, 3 years later, Britain reneged, I'm afraid. Britain reneged on the Balfour Declaration and decided, because we do love our royalty in Britain, it decided to give Jordan, the current day Jordan, to a Bedouin king, the Hashemite king, King Abdullah, I believe it was. And that's been the case ever since. So the land, the pretty much empty land that was deemed to be for the Jews to return to their ancient homeland was excised, and 70% of it went to a Bedouin king. Now, you may or may not know that in the West Bank, what's called the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, there's been unbroken Jewish residence for, I believe, 3,000 to 3,500 years, except for the period between 1948 to 67, when Jordan illegally occupied it. It was a largely unrecognized occupation, recognized only by, I think, Britain and Pakistan. And in the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel liberated that land from the illegal occupation. So, in my view, and this is a personal view only, it may be held by many of you, the word annexation would be more accurately described as extending sovereignty to the West Bank. Just a few things about the West Bank. The founder of the Jewish religion, Abraham, the Jewish and of course the Muslim religion, Abraham, is believed by Jews and Muslims, Orthodox Jews and Muslims, to be buried in just outside Hebron, in the center of the West Bank. It's the shrine to, in fact, there's a shrine there now, there's a big tomb, which is prayed at by both Jews and Muslims. Now, unfortunately, because of bomb attacks by Muslims and Molotov cocktails being thrown, there's heavy security there. I would view, and you're welcome, of course, to leave your comments in the chat box and I will read them out if Ronnie. In my view, it's simply re-establishing sovereignty to an area that was illegally occupied by an illegitimate product of the British Empire, namely Jordan.
So would you like me to add anything to what you've just said?
You're welcome, or we can move on to the next question as you wish.
Well, just briefly to say, I think you're absolutely right that the legal and historical precedents are there for Israel to annex portions of what are called the West Bank. I suppose what a lot of people are concerned about is it wise and is it the right time? And clearly among friends of Israel, there's a great deal of controversy about that. And I would simply say that North London Friends of Israel doesn't have a position on that. That's a matter for the Israeli government and Israeli democracy. The one thing I would say is that, as I understand, the proposed annexation is not of the whole West Bank, it's of the major settlement blocks, which are generally expected to go to Israel in any peace settlement. Yes,
good point. So the extension of sovereignty, yeah, thanks for putting it out, would not be to the entire West Bank. It would avoid every center of Arab population. Okay, so thank you very much, Harry.
There's another question. This is from Getahun, and here is the question. As an Ethiopian myself, I would like to know why there has been lots of complaints about the treatment of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. Recently, there was a lot of news on different media outlets about Ethiopian Jews being mistreated by Israeli police. There is also poverty and inequality in the Ethiopian Jewish community. I know Israel is one of the most democratic nations in the world, and I know the state of Israel has been working really hard to help integrate the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel for the last 30 years. There are also many Ethiopian Jews who have been very successful and live a comfortable life. Considering the amount of good work the government has been doing, there are still complaints coming from this section of the community. Do you think we will see lots of improvement in the future regarding mistreatment and inequalities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Angela. And apologies to all the people who've been waiting. I've let you in now. There are now nearly 30 of us, so welcome all. And the question, if you didn't hear it, was about Ethiopian Jews. So I've just made some notes, and I think it's very important to compare Israel to every other country in the world. So if you can imagine, let's say, imagine a Britain where a black immigrant who came to the country maybe 20 years ago became Minister of Absorption and Integration. That's exactly what has just happened in Israel. An Ethiopian immigrant who came over in 1992, I believe, has just been chosen to become a cabinet minister for absorption and integration. So I think that's possibly unique amongst the world. So again, if you compare Israel to other countries, in Britain, the first minority, the first black MP, after 30 years, perhaps of maybe 50 years at least of mass immigration of black people from the ex-British Empire, was in 1986. Israel had minority MPs from day one in its first parliament in 1949. There have been race riots in Britain in the 1980s, in 1990s. There have been deaths in police custody in Britain. There were very unpleasant examples of mistreatment of blacks in the USA. There's the slave trade, black slave trade in Mauritania, which is ongoing today. So it's a majority Muslim state. So I think that it's important to compare Israel with other countries. It's not perfect, but let me just give you an example of how, when integrated, apart from the MP, the cabinet minister, and how in just 20 years, Israel has, in my view, worked wonders. There's a lovely story of back in 1992, immigrants from Ethiopia came over to Israel. They trekked through sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles of desert, and they came from basically Stone Age circumstances almost. And Israel has a very well-oiled system for welcoming immigrants, whereby they go to what's called an ulpan, which is where they learn Hebrew. And they're given reasonably nice rooms to stay in with their families. And it was found that some people simply weren't coming out of their rooms. And so there was a knock on the door, and the staff opened the door, and they said to the immigrants, "Why don't you come out?" And it was discovered that they didn't actually know how to operate a doorknob. Okay, so now they've gone from Stone Age, let's say Stone Age conditions, to becoming cabinet ministers in just 20 years. So I'd like to congratulate Israel even on the incredibly rapid integration. If you like your pop music, if you've been watching Eurovision, the Israeli Eurovision song entry this year, called Feker Libi, is actually by an Ethiopian, a very young Ethiopian pop star, who sings in 3 languages. She sings in Arabic, she sings in Amharic, which is the Ethiopian language, and she sings in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, called Ivrit, of course. So I think Israel's done very well. On the negative side, there was an Ethiopian who died in police custody or got into a fight with police, I don't know. So there was a problem. But overall, I think, to be fair, Israel's done extremely well in integrating its minority population. Let's go to comments. We have lots of comments and questions coming through. Okay, great question about Ethiopian Jews. It says here from Jennifer, thank you. Now, let's go to questions. Question from Michael, thank you. I'm concerned about the continual attacks on Israeli civilians by Hamas terrorists. When is the Israeli government going to deal with Hamas once and for all, so that attacks will cease? Okay, so this is more of a political question. So I'm certainly going to answer it in a general way, because North London Friends of Israel has a policy of, despite my answer to my despite my answer to the first question about trying to avoid political statements, but in my view, and it may not come across well, Israel is extremely patient for a number of reasons in the way it deals with Hamas. If you can imagine bombs flying over from France to London like they did in the Second World War, but attempting to target civilians. That's what Israeli citizens have to put up with on a regular basis, and they have to run to bomb shelters, sometimes having only 15 seconds. If you count to 15 mentally in your head and see how far you can run or walk, if you're less well able, then it's clearly not a long period of time. So they have that amount of time sometimes to get to bomb shelters. So it's very difficult because Hamas is a terrorist group. It's dedicated not just to the elimination of Israel, but to Jews worldwide. I'm afraid it's a very, very unpleasant group, and I think Israel has to respond judiciously, and it tries to avoid killing civilians. A major problem a major reason Israel doesn't respond with greater force is that Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon actually site their missiles and their bombs and their weapon stations in residential houses. They turn people's homes into military bases. And in fact, they've even used United Nations schools as storehouses for their bombs. So when you hear about United Nations premises being bombed, that is because there are missiles being fired from the proximity of United Nations schools in Gaza, which is at Israeli civilians, which is a double war crime. You're firing at innocent civilians, and you're firing from the vicinity of innocent civilians who might and have got harmed by retaliatory attacks to stop the bombing. So thank you for that. That was from Michael.
Okay, thank you. Now, just a couple of points. I mean, from the Israeli point of view, I mean, one thing which I think we all realize is they're deeply concerned about the casualties of any sustained attack on Hamas and the international ructions that would result from that. But I think there's another thing that Israeli planners are concerned about, which is that they believe that Iran and Hezbollah are the greater strategic threat. And they are worried, I think, about being bogged down in a conflict in Gaza, which might give Iran and Hezbollah, who are actually far more powerful than Hamas, an opening to attack them from the north. So this is the sort of really difficult decision that Israeli planners have to weigh up, and it's incredibly frustrating for people in Israeli towns in the south who have to put up with the attacks by Hamas. But I think those are the kind of considerations there.
Thank you very much, Harry. Yes, I should give an example of how much of the length that Israel goes to avoid civilian casualties in Gaza, notwithstanding that you might have heard of lots of civilians being killed. There are two main ways that Israel tries to avoid civilian casualties, and that is that if they find that there is somebody with what they call blood on their hands, somebody who has instituted a terrorist attack that murdered Israelis, or they discover that there are missiles underneath an apartment building, they will do one or both of these things. They will call every single resident of the apartment building and ask them to leave. That's the first thing. The second thing is they will do what's called a double tap. They will bomb the top of the building with a bomb that has no explosives and has very little effect, which just creates noise. And that's a signal to the residents to leave immediately, because that building is a target. Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from Anwar Farouk. I hope I'm pronouncing Getahun's name and all the foreign names correct. Thank you very much. Welcome to Ashley. Thank you. Sorry for the wait, Ashley. Okay, Anwar, your question is, what attempts are made to befriend many neighboring, remote, outspoken, the poor and silent countries? I think that means what attempts are made to befriend neighboring countries? Very interesting question, very topical. At the moment, it's Ramadan, for all our Muslim listeners who obviously know that. And what happens at Ramadan in the Middle East is that families get together, a bit like Passover, Pesach, for Jews. They get together and they tend to watch television in the evenings after they've had their iftar fast. So you might know that Muslims fast from dawn till dusk. So what tends to happen is that they sit there and they watch popular soap operas, and there's a revolutionary soap opera at the moment in Saudi Arabia, which actually features a Jew. Now that may not seem surprising at all to people in the West, but Jews were ethnically cleansed from Arab states across the Middle East between 1948 and around 1956 in very large numbers, even right up to the 1990s. And there were pogroms, there were show trials, they were forced out at the point of a gun en masse. And in fact, more Jewish refugees were created by Arab states than Palestinian refugees were created by the Palestinians trying to eradicate the state of Israel in 1948, aided by 5 Arab armies. So there's been a 70-year history of poor treatment by Arab states of Jews and Israel. Now that slowly, for complex reasons, which I'll just touch on, namely the fact that the Arab states see Iran as a much greater threat to them than Israel. Iran is not an Arab nation. A lot of people see the Middle East as monolithic. They see it as Muslim, which of course it is. But it's also the cradle of Christianity and Judaism and many other religions, as you might have heard when the Iraqi civil war took place. There were lots of small, relatively unheard of religions who were persecuted terribly. But anyway, to avoid diverting too much, in recent years, Arab states have seen that Iran is a much, much greater threat to them than Israel. And the old saying, especially in the Middle East, applies, and that is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they've gone to Israel for defensive weaponry, very much under the radar, because for the last 70 years, they've educated their people to literally hate Jews. It's sad to say, but it is the case. In school textbooks, it's taking place now in Gaza as well. But slowly, that has been dissipating. And what another reason this has happened is because there's an Israeli TV series that some of you might have seen called Fauda. Fauda is an Arabic word which means panic. And what this series does is it describes Israelis who were called Mistaravim, which translates as, I suppose you could call it fake Arabs. And these Israelis, they inculcate themselves with Arab and Muslim customs, and they integrate themselves into the West Bank and Gaza, and they discover when there are going to be terrorist attacks, they try to thwart them. So some of the ex-members of this Mist-Aravim unit created a TV series called Father, and it is incredibly popular in the Arab world. So slowly, hopefully, there'll be more and more of this happening. Just one more example, and before I go to Harry to add something, but the discrimination was such that if you had an Israeli stamp in your passport, or if you were Jewish, you were not permitted. There was an apartheid-like exclusion for Jews from countries in the Gulf of Arabia. Now, about a year or two ago, the International Olympic Federation made it clear that it was not going to put up with this any longer after 70 years, and Israelis were permitted to attend. Israeli judo athletes were permitted to attend a judoka, which is a big competition, big judo competition. I think it was Dubai. And the Israeli, one of the Israeli ministers at the time was invited to tour the Grand Mosque as well. And they actually had the some Israelis won the competition. They had the Israeli national anthem and the Israeli national anthem playing, the Israeli flag being shown in an Arab country. And you could see the Israeli minister literally crying when she saw it, because it was one of the first times that Jews and Israelis had been allowed in the Gulf states. So Israelis are actually desperate for peace. They've given up huge tracts of land, protective land, to make peace. And so I'm delighted that these moves have been made, and I'm sure all Jews and all Israelis worldwide are too. Harry, would you like to add anything? In fact, whilst I'm trying to do that, Harry, I'm just going to unmute this person. And you are now unmuted, so please carry on. Give your name, if you would.
My name is Getahun.
Oh, Getahun, hello, welcome.
Yeah, hello, hi. I think the Israeli government has been doing so many things to bring peace and stability to Israel and to all the neighboring countries. I think it is entirely up to the neighboring countries, to Palestine, to Iran, and to other countries to cooperate with Israel.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I think that's it really is.
Yeah. It definitely is up to the other country, because Israel has been working hard to bring in peace and stability to all the Middle East countries. So it's entirely up to the other countries to participate.
Yes, it's true. Thank you very much, Getahun. In 1970, it's not commonly known, but the Palestinians indulged in a civil war in Jordan, and Syria invaded to help them. But the only reason that one of the reasons they quickly went back across their frontier is because Israel mobilized its army and saying, if you don't get out, we will fight you. So they actually protected the state of Jordan. So, Harry, you're now unmuted. I'm going to mute myself, so do carry on.
Sorry, all I was going to say is, I wonder if perhaps we should confirm with Anwar that was what the question was about, because I wasn't sure whether it was about relations with other Middle Eastern countries or whether it was about poor countries around the world.
Anwar, if the question wasn't answered, if I went on too much about something that wasn't right, then you please do put a message in the box. Anwar, thank you so much for your kind reply with such nice friendship. Shalom. Okay, so it looks like that was answered. Thank you, Harry. So, any more? Fred and Heather. Is Israel's poor PR partly responsible for the world's view of it? Good question. Harry, do you want to answer that, or shall I?
I would say partly, but by no means entirely. I think some of us have occasionally despaired at the embassy and the things it doesn't do. But I think we need to understand that the publicity problems, if we can call them that, go way beyond anything Israel itself does or doesn't do. And you just have to look at this country, for example. When the BBC reports, or rather when the BBC doesn't report a Hamas attack, so there can be a Hamas attack on Monday, it's not reported by the BBC, Tuesday the same, Wednesday the same, and so on and so on. And this can go on for days. And then, let's say on Sunday, the Israelis finally hit back. That, for the first time, will make the news. And then there will be a BBC headline that says, Israel today struck at targets in the Gaza Strip. They may then add it was in response to rocket attacks, but of course they didn't report those rocket attacks on the days that they happened. So I know for a fact that the embassy does what it can on this, and I know for a fact that the national pro-Israel organisations here talk to the BBC about this. And it's not just the BBC, but it goes on happening. So
Right,
yes, Israel is getting poor publicity, but I don't think you can lay that at Israel's door.
Thank you, Harry.
Unless if that were the case, because then it would be easy to fix.
And I've got some comments here. Let me just see if I've read them all. Right, in fact, Anwar, you asked about physical support to poor countries. Right, okay, very good. Let's deal with that. Now, back in the 1960s, Israel created an organization, in fact, late 50s even, Israel created an organization called Mashav. And Mashav, M-A-S-H-A-V, do look it up, is an organization dedicated to transferring Israel's knowledge about how to cultivate crops in extremely arid circumstances. Its job was to teach poor farmers across Africa, in particular, about the Israeli techniques, because Israel managed to grow Jaffa oranges, world famous Jaffa oranges, from sand. So Israel invited African farmers to come to I think it was a Volcani Institute, Volcani Institute near Tel Aviv, where they did groundbreaking research in genetics and maximizing the returns from minimal inputs. Unfortunately, after the Six-Day War, there was the Arab majority in the United Nations prevailed upon the third world undeveloped countries or underdeveloped countries to break off diplomatic relations with Israel. And that meant that all these farmers weren't able to come across to Israel and learn anymore. So that was extremely unfortunate. But now Israel has diplomatic relations with many more African countries again. And that process is beginning to re-emerge. In fact, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was invited, I think it was last year or the year before, he was the only invitee from outside of Africa from outside of Africa to attend a multinational conference of African leaders, which I think was a major coup for a absolutely tiny state of Israel to be invited to attend a conference with African leaders. Trump wasn't invited. The Prime Minister of France, which has many ex-colonies in Africa, wasn't invited. So I think that was an excellent example of Africa wanting to learn from Israeli technology again. So thank you for your message, Anwar. And he says, Shalom to all. Nice to see you all, dear friends of Israel. Thank you very much. Okay, from Sarah, the BBC has an agenda to make Israel look as bad as possible, in my opinion. Well, I think that extends across to The Guardian as well, in my view. And the unfortunate thing that happened, which Harry alluded to, was that what you tend to see is a report on Israeli retaliation for a war crime. So Hamas will dig a tunnel and will infiltrate and kidnap an Israeli. and then Israel will, because the Israelis take their lives very seriously, they will respond strongly. And that's when you hear the news. And unfortunately, it looks like it's come from nothing. And to me, that's one of the major faults with the news reporting. For the comments, Jennifer, isn't it our Jewish values to also stand with Palestinians that are oppressed? Can we not love Israel and Palestinians? Good point. And there's another comment. I have a Christian friend. From Michael. I'm a Christian in Bethlehem who is oppressed by Palestinian Islamists who want him out of Bethlehem. Okay, I'll come on to that because that's a big problem. Let me just deal with Jennifer's point. So if it comes across that, well, I hope we did answer, if it comes across that we're a bit negative to Palestinians, I hope it came across in the answer to the question about friendship with neighbouring countries, that that's absolutely not the case. The difference between, well, no, let me go back. In 1948, around 650,000 Arabs left because there was a war, because they fought against the Jews, mostly Holocaust survivors, and 5 Arab states invaded basically to throw the Jews into the sea. That was their stated aim. Around 650,000 people left, 650,000 Arabs left, 200,000 Arabs stayed. They didn't become refugees. Those 200,000 refugees now, those 200,000 Arabs who left, they have a nickname in the Middle East. I don't know if anyone knows the nickname. You're welcome to put it into the chat. I won't give it yet because I will wait for comments. But those 200,000 Arabs have now become around 2 million Israelis. Their population has increased tenfold. And they are fully integrated members of society. They have 15 members of parliament. So, Jennifer, I don't know if you heard the answer. I'm sure you'll tell me if I didn't answer it correctly. So, Michael, I'm going to rush a minute because we've actually gone over time. I think they might have extended our time by 15 minutes. So, Michael says, I have a Christian friend. I'm a Christian myself. I have a Christian friend in Bethlehem who is oppressed by Palestinian Islamists who want him out of Bethlehem. Ashley Dickinson also says, I'm a practicing Christian who regrets how the church treated the Jews, especially during the Shoah, the Holocaust. Thank you very much, Ashley, for that. And Sarah, thank you for telling me I'm on mute. And Amar says, appreciate your kind response to my inquiries. Okay, let's go back to Bethlehem. Yes, Bethlehem being the cradle, the birthplace of Christianity. When Israel controlled Bethlehem, from 1967 to 1994, Bethlehem was the only area, the only town in the entire Middle East where the Christian population grew. Unfortunately, since Israel relinquished control of Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank, to the Palestinians, the Christian population has been absolutely decimated in the birthplace of Christ. I think it's gone down from around, people might correct me if I'm wrong, from around 20% of the population to 8%. There's been a silent exodus of Christians from Bethlehem to Israel. That's highly unfortunate. It's a highly unfortunate and not well-known ethnic cleansing of Christians from the birthplace of Jesus Christ. So Anwar, appreciate the humanitarian technological support for the many needy countries and fellow human beings. Salam to all, thank you very much. So put your hand up if you can hear me, because I've got messages saying I'm on mute. Am I still on mute? No, I'm off mute, thank you, okay. Yes, I have recorded the meeting, and what I'll do, Harry, is I'll send it to you, and if you can go on Facebook and on the website as a link, we'll do that. We'd like to hear the answer to Jennifer's question. Leon, I don't think you addressed Jennifer's question. Nope, he didn't, but it's okay, I'll come back to it. Okay, are there any more questions? We've gone over time. I did say 45 minutes, it's now about 50. If you have a question, I'm going to put you on gallery view. You can raise your hand, and oh, Jennifer has a question. Tony, did you have a question? No, Jennifer has a question. Okay, I'm going to unmute Jennifer. Jennifer, you're unmuted. Welcome, Jennifer.
Okay. Shalom, everybody. Hi,
Shalom.
American Jew here. So we're a little more liberal. Sorry, guys. My question is this. Anyone oppressed in Israel or Palestine, shouldn't that be our Jewish values to support all that are oppressed, not just some, and Christians, Muslims, whoever is oppressed throughout the whole Palestine, Israel locale?
Yeah, agreed. Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. It's a good point. The position with Israeli Arabs is that they are a minority population, and every minority in every majority country where the majority is a different religion or a different colour can find it difficult. But in my view, Israeli Arabs are extremely well integrated. But in terms of caring for people, I think it's true that there is a severe problem for gay people in Gaza. There've been some despicable treatment of them. And in fact, one of the members of our committee, ex-members I think he is gay. And he went out with an Arab from, I can't remember if it's Gaza or the West Bank, who fled for his life and now found solace in Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv is a very liberal city. Arabs, Muslim Arabs from across the Middle East who can escape their countries and are gay have found sanctuary in Tel Aviv. So, I mean, it's an absolutely valid point. And I hope that Israel scores very well on that regard of not just caring for Jews, but caring for Arabs as well. It treats its Druze so well that the Druze is an offshoot of Islam. The Druze population of Israel serves in the Israeli army. Back in 1983 to 86, I think it was, when Israel withdrew from Lebanon, it was supported by certain sects, particularly Christians in South Lebanon, and they knew that they would be ethnically cleansed and tortured and murdered when Israel withdrew by the other sects in Lebanon. So Israel let them seek sanctuary in Israel. So I think Israel scores pretty well on that regard. Harry, would you like to say anything?
Thank you. I mean, I absolutely agree with the point behind Jennifer's question, which is that in Jewish ethics, we should always stand up for the oppressed. I think the problem is that in order to do that, you first have to understand who's oppressed and who is oppressing them. And that requires a lot more thought than just saying we're for the oppressed. So, for example, Palestinians are subject to apartheid policies. So, for example, in Lebanon, they cannot own land, they are barred from certain professions, and so on and so forth. And bear in mind, we are not talking about people who are refugees in any reasonable definition of the term, although UNRWA regards them as such. We are talking about people who are, in many cases, third and fourth generation Lebanon born. And this country across the Arab world. Leon mentioned the problems that gay people have across the Arab world and on. So I'm actually all for the Jewish values of standing with the oppressed. What I will not do is accept the idea that because Jews believe in ethical values, therefore we should hold ourselves to higher standards than we hold everybody else. because the rest of the world wants to do that, and we ought not to be going along with it. It seems to me that Judaism is a universalist religion, and that means that everybody in the world has the same rights, but also the same moral obligations.
Thank you.
I have no less moral obligation than my neighbour, but also no more. That would be my answer.
So what I'm going to do now is we had 28 to 30 people, I think. We're now down to 21. So it might be some people want to leave. I'll just say that if you do have a question, put your hand up. Those whose screen I can see. Tony, I see one. So I'll make that the last question. And then Harry, if you could at the end, put that screenshot back up for people, the contact details, and that'll be a nice ending. Okay, so Tony, I'm going to unmute you.
Hello.
Hello,
Yeah,
Tony.
Just say the number of Christians in Bethlehem was not 20%, as you said, it was about 80%.
Thank you very much. I got it the other way around. It was 80-20. Sorry, okay.
No, you said you 20-8, I think, but then it was about 80%.
80%, right.
I think it's down to 20 now.
Right, sorry, I got the figures wrong.
Of how non-Muslims are oppressed throughout the Muslim world. And you talk about people being oppressed, it's almost always minorities who are not Muslim, as Israelis would be if they were taken over by the Muslims.
Yes.
So I think Israel has a right to defend itself against Islamic attacks and so on.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the correction. So I had the figures mixed up. It was 80% Christian in Bethlehem, now down to 20%, which is obviously a distressingly low number. So thank you for that point, Tony. I'm going to say thank you very much indeed, everyone, for listening. It's been a pleasure to see everyone's face and to welcome you all. If you would like to have another one of these, please leave a note in the Zoom group chat, and we'll discuss it and see if we have another one in due course. And I'm just going to say shalom from London. And Harry, if you'd be good enough to put that screenshot back up, the one we had at the beginning with the contact details on. Okay, you should be able to do it now.
I can.
And thank you, everybody.
Can I?
Yeah, you can talk. You can talk.
Yeah.
You're on, Harry.
Yeah.
I think
Can
I'll leave it open to you, and then I'm going to mute everybody. Okay, go on.
Just a moment. Yes, I just wanted to say, so please do get in touch if anybody would like to continue the conversation by email, or would like to get in touch, or would like to get involved in our activities, especially when the current situation is over and we can go back to our face-to-face local activities. But do feel free to email us or get in touch via our website to continue the conversation.
Thank you, and I'm going to close the meeting, and good evening to all.